without evidence, President Trump is making these claims. Is there really an antitrust issue here?
Well, when it comes to this issue of whether or not Google and the other sites are suppressing conservative viewpoints, that very likely is not an antitrust issue because of the First Amendment. But the president is certainly not the only person in Washington to be raising these issues. I think it's an interesting moment in Washington at the moment where you have a lot of liberals and conservatives who are saying that many of these companies, particularly Google, Facebook, Amazon, are too big, too dominant, and at the very least deserve some antitrust scrutiny that they haven't gotten for many years.
It's a very curious strategy, given that even the president's own campaign manager acknowledges that Facebook helped him win the presidential election. Take a listen to what Brad Parscale told me a couple of months ago.
I've been very specific that I think Facebook's how we won in a lot of ways. I think President Trump won. I think Facebook is that 0.1% that delivered his message. I think if Facebook wouldn't exist, it would have been a lot tougher. If you're watching Facebook for 4 hours this year, but next year you're watching 3 hours of Facebook, but 1 hour of YouTube, that changes. So we're going to monitor where eyes are going. I think YouTube continues and Google continues to work on that platform and make improvements. I think what Google's done to the search algorithm also to put YouTube results at the top, they continue to put a lot of focus and they understand the value of that platform. So we're watching it closely. We're using it for a lot of things now. We're using it probably more now than we even were in 2016.
So, Sheryl, in those comments, not only does Brad Parscale acknowledge that Facebook helped the president win, but also that they're going to use Google and YouTube more in the next campaign. How does this make sense?
Yeah, and look, both things can be true, right? That the president and his allies can be among the savviest users of Facebook and YouTube and other internet properties, and the president and his allies can believe that those companies are too big and powerful, right? I think there's a legal issue and there's a political risk issue. So legally, it's going to be a hard case, as the law has developed so far, to prove that Google, Facebook, or Amazon are violating antitrust rules, because there's a very specific test, which is the power of these companies harming consumers? And that's largely based on prices of consumer products. And it's hard to make the case that any of those three companies have really been directly harming prices of things that consumers buy. But there's still a political risk, right? That if the president and his allies or other people who believe, let's say, social media sites are squelching conservative points of view, if that gets people to use Facebook less or to distrust Google more, that is a real risk to those companies. And at the same time, we've seen the FTC and the DOJ Antitrust Division both say that they're taking a closer look at how the law should be applied to different kinds of companies, including these digital technology giants like Google and Facebook and Amazon. And again, even if you can't win an antitrust case against those companies, you can drag those companies into these lengthy regulatory reviews, as Google itself has been through in the United States and in Europe, and that's both distracting and potentially harmful to businesses there.
So Google's response to the president's remarks has been, search is not used to set a political agenda. We don't bias our results toward any political ideology. Meantime, Google, Facebook, and Twitter have been called to testify next week. We're going to be covering these hearings in depth. Google, for one, has not agreed to send their top person. Facebook, however, is sending Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg. Twitter is sending Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey. David, how do you expect these hearings to proceed, given the tenor of the president's remarks leading up to this?
Well, I think these hearings just go to this sort of ongoing chorus of criticism that, when it comes to, as in the clip you just played, their power over campaigns is very strong, as we saw. So in Washington, I think that you'll see the FTC and the DOJ certainly take a harder look at these companies. I mean, in the next few months, we're going to see the FTC open a number of hearings into antitrust issues, and one of the things they're going to be looking at is tech in particular, and whether the sort of antitrust framework that exists right now, whether that should be changed in some way to address this issue that the products they're selling or they're not selling that are free, and do the antitrust laws, are they able to get at that? And I think that's one of the big issues that enforcers need to be considering and will be.
Sheryl, what are you going to be watching for next week? There was such fanfare around Mark Zuckerberg's testimony. He largely did well. However, the questions from lawmakers were often fairly ignorant. I mean, do you think Congress will be better prepared? And then, on the flip side, how will Sheryl Sandberg and Jack Dorsey perform under that pressure?
Yeah, I do think members of Congress will be better prepared. We saw even with the Zuckerberg hearings that members of the House, which went second after the Senate, they seem to have learned from the senators' mistakes in questioning Mark Zuckerberg. And even though you're right, Zuckerberg did a good job in those hearings, I do think it was revealing, maybe in ways that Mark Zuckerberg didn't intend, that I felt he dodged a lot of questions. He seemed almost embarrassed to kind of explain out loud the business model of Facebook to collect user data and sell advertising against that. And to me, at least, that was revealing and I think damaging to Zuckerberg's and Facebook's reputation. I think Sheryl Sandberg in particular is kind of a well-rehearsed spokesperson for that company. Dorsey less so, although he's had some experience more recently going in these TV interviews and other places. And you just don't know what happens in congressional hearings, right? And these execs can be as prepared as they possibly could be, and you still may have these revealing moments that come out of left field. So I think none of these companies want their senior executives to be trotted in front of the cameras and in front of members of Congress who have access to grind.
David, folks we've talked to think that Google is really missing a big opportunity here by not sending a higher level representative. What could the repercussions of that be down the line, and if Congress is looking seriously at regulation?
Well, then, as I think you saw Senator Burr, Senator Warren say, they're not going to be part of the solution, and if that's the case, then we don't want them here. Look, I think, of all these companies, Google is the one that's been the most targeted by enforcers. So, the FTC here did a long investigation of the company, ultimately closed that, but then they have this ongoing investigation in Europe that's resulted in fines amounting to something like $7 or $8 billion. So it seems to me that they're the most exposed at the moment.